Understand course right. It looks like this is going south.
It looks like it's going, if I understand course right, it looks like this is going south.
You may know him from his own YouTube channel, Going South, although he seems to be going north every time I talk to the man. But his YouTube channel, Going South.
Yes.
We had Jeremy
Yeah,
Corbyn.
everything's going south. Yeah,
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 everything
sure.
is
It's all
going
going
south.
south, right?
Yeah.
Right. It's going south, but that it's not all or nothing. It doesn't mean that it goes south until everything completely vanishes.
Yeah, but do you
Right,
think
which many people can easily say that
Yeah.
it's all going south. There's absolutely nothing we can do.
Hello, all. Welcome to today's space. Um, Once again, I try to see if it's possible you can enable the microphone before you tell everybody that the space has started. And apparently, you can't. So there's two possibilities. One, you don't invite anybody, you talk. And two, you invite everybody, but you don't talk. uh, Once again, we see how absolutely horrible the software is. But then again, we expected that. Uh, this is an interesting conversation today. We're going to go to two different topics that are somewhat interrelated in some respects. The main topic is the insect apocalypse. And as a sideline to the insect apocalypse is all of the other issues that occur. As was noted by the Chinese in the 1950s, if you kill off your insects or you kill off your birds, you start to see dramatic changes in your environment as secondary effects. So you have to be very, very careful when you start tinkering with the ecosystem. What exactly are the parameters that you're going to change unexpectedly? And the second topic uh, is essentially a sideline to that. What do we do in the United States that other countries don't in terms of our environmental regulation, which apparently is about to be completely thrown out the window? Anyway, what do we do differently in terms of uh, pesticides, herbicides uh, that other countries in the EU, Asia, don't do? Why we are uh, unique? And I'm also going to go that's going to be extended into a few other topics because there are other things that we do in our industrial era that industrial uh, realm that other countries don't necessarily do, which shows a pattern in the United States of not following, and this is even before the Trump administration, not following with best practices for ensuring the best outcomes for environmental regulation and assistance. We have a tiny little poll attached to our space today. It's what are your favorite invertebrates? And uh, we want everyone to participate, even if it's just a fun little poll. I've got to find where it is right now and see if I can pop that on the. Kim has been working her fingers to the bone to make this an exciting space today. I'm just along for the ride on some of this. We are going to talk about a few things, other things that we've discussed over the week, including a little discussion, which kind of is going to be a lead off to something we're going to do in a few weeks on science fiction. what exactly is a parsec? Everybody who's a fan of Star Wars, or maybe not so much of a fan of Star Wars, knows about the infamous Kessel Run that the Millennium Falcon was able to do in 12 parsecs. Of course, a parsec is not a unit of time, it is a unit of length, and we're going to discuss exactly what a parsec is. And we we love to do these little earth science and astronomy little tweaks. So I'm just waiting for more to join us. If at any time anyone wants to join another conversation, please feel free. Just raise a hand. You'll be acknowledged. I'm still I the space officially starts at 10:30, which should be any second now, but I like to start early just to ensure that if there are any technical issues, they can be uh, surpassed before other people join in. To me, there's nothing worse than having people knocking on your door and not being able to get in because you've had a problem with technical issues that prohibits them from joining. We are going to, before things heat up and we talk about the other issues, we are going to, I guess there's no other choice about it. We do have to talk about uh, what has happened in the last month, and it perhaps even more specifically in the last few hours with deregulation, or perhaps it's even better to describe it as the total elimination of EPA standards for United States clean air and water. They've decided that the Trump administration that we don't deserve to have a clean country, that we don't deserve to have an environment that uh, promotes and fosters life. I don't understand why, but this is an issue that we are going to have to go into at some length eventually today and eventually for the next few weeks and months, as there's no other choice. In order for us to properly to survive as a nation, as an economic power, we have to have clean water. You have to have clean air. Even if you have industry, you still have to have clean water and clean air. And that is something we're not doing very, very well. But we've had a long history of environmental regulation and a very, very long industry of doing what's necessary to promote positive environmental uh, rules and regulations that help to enable. And John has joined us, and let's see if that works. I'm pressing on the invite to speak key, and hello, Kim, invite to speak. This is so terrible. I've mentioned that I had problems this week with, well, we all had problems when there was that one day of outage. And during that one day, it seems that a lot of I'm holding the button down, and I'm trying to do. Boy, this is really so slow. Let's see what I can do. Even though I have an extremely fast phone, let's see if I can do something to speed things up further. Get rid of that app. Get rid of that app.
Good morning.
Good morning. Okay, so it's nice to hear because my phone refuses to acknowledge that you're a speaker.
Oh, okay. Well, it did take I noticed that it's very slow this morning. I apologize for being late, but I had a bit of a weird situation too. One of the circuits in my, I guess, in my breakers went, and one of them was like my computer, my son's computer, half of the kitchen appliances. I mean, it wasn't a problem. I just went back and flipped the switch, but I'm wondering, why that's occurring. Because a few days ago, when it was really heavy rain, the circuits for the garage and my front house lights also broke the circuit. So it's not a fuse. It's just I don't know what you call it, where you just flip it back and forth.
Circuit breaker.
Circuit breaker. Yeah, that's it exactly. So something funny is going on there. I don't know what it is, but I apologize for being late.
You-
But it
You're
does.
you're a little too you're a little too far away for me to do a house call.
Yeah, exactly. I need a solar engineer over here ASAP, but I'll probably let it linger and disaster will strike because I haven't paid attention to it enough or something like that.
How
Because
how bad
I'm
was
too worried.
how bad was the water?
Oh, geez. Well, I have a downward sloping driveway, and at the bottom of it is like a metal grate with little holes in it. And I think it's the original one from when this house was built in like 1970. And I also have right basically hanging over the driveway is a large oak tree. Now, right then it wasn't, there weren't any acorns or stuff like that, but the debris, the rocks, the salt, everything like that invariably ends up getting clogged. And I did have some flooding in the garage. I just kept on going and trying to sweep over it to remove whatever was there. But it's a tricky time of year because you don't know how much underneath is frozen in terms of the water. So, anyways, luckily the temperatures kind of stabilized, the melt stopped, and so there's no imminent flooding that's going to occur. I think I'm okay for now because I'd say about 60% of the snow is melted, and I don't think there's any rain in the forecast. It's just like the rivers that get um, blocked by ice, and then there's melt occurring at the same time. It's basically the same thing with my driveway. You don't want both to happen at the same time. But thank you for asking.
Well, okay, because here's the problem. Salt water is a very good conductor of electricity. And if you
Oh.
have, let's say, a garage door opener, or if
Mhm.
you have a water pump for a motor that's exposed, it is possible that if the water goes high enough, and you don't have to flood the wire, you just have to get the wire wet enough that salt water penetrates from the insulator into one of your connectors, you could then have a very, very small arc, and that could cause you to pop breakers, a specific breaker. If
Ah.
it's bad enough, you can get multiple breakers popping.
Now, would that be something that, let's say that happened last week, would that be something affecting this week?
It's possible if you're the water is dripping into a conductor, into a Romex cable, actually BNC, not a BX cable. It is possible that you could get an arc, that you could get leakage current going through, and it could cause you to trip circuit breakers. Then there's other possibilities involved. The other possibility that's involved is sometimes you have neighborhood power issues where your line voltage in your neighborhood spikes, and if you have a spike and you're very, very close to the edge of, if you've got a 15 amp breaker and there's 11 amps going through and suddenly you get a voltage spike, you could be drawing temporarily 17, 18 amps. And then it could trip breakers off because you're talking about multiple breakers, not single breakers.
Right. You know what? You might be onto something there because I'm just thinking about my street. And in the last couple of years, it's had a lot of construction and people basically tearing down smaller homes and putting like mega homes in it. And currently on the street, there's two houses under construction, and it's only a street of like, let's say 16 houses. So it's not like a huge street. So that's, um, I don't know, what is that, like 20% of the homes are under construction and they're running these, although I don't know. Yeah, I mean I guess it's something I should definitely look at. But yeah, you're right. Maybe some water somehow has gotten into the system, because prior to this, I really haven't had any problems in terms of, the relying on the electricity. So that's strange. But yeah, I'll get that looked into. Thank you for pointing that out. Good morning, everyone.
Hey,
Okay,
Good morning.
I couldn't
Good
help
good
morning,
but
morning,
Puppy.
all.
Good morning, Robert. Good morning, John.
I couldn't help but notice
And
you
of
were the
course, Sal
person
and
that made
Nikki.
the insect tweet. I didn't realize it was you because I've seen this like a long time ago. It's a banger, man.
Oh, well, we did okay, the ecology and climate account is actually climate ecology account is actually a shared account. Kim and I both have the ability to post on that account. And so every once in a while, she takes charge of it, and she did the poll, and she's done a lot of posting on it this week to bring people in to discuss these issues.
Sorry, Nikki, I didn't catch most of what you said. Could you say it again, please?
I heard him say he mentioned something about the insects. So
Yeah. So basically, I think I initially was exposed to your account because of this tweet you made about how things used to be with the insect diversity 40 years ago. And I didn't realize you were the person behind the tweet until I checked your profile just now because I remember reposting that a while ago. So yeah, good banger, man.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we're back lamenting the insects again. I guess you could say it is difficult to do. And yeah, I mean, it's just, it's more bad news about the insects. But there are things that we could do about that, which
I
we will discuss.
I run an account on Instagram where I basically kind of make commentary about stuff I usually get exposed to, and your tweet was actually one of them. And unsurprisingly, that particular post I made a commentary about. I think it just recently passed like 100,000 likes. I'm not really in this for like the metrics or whatever, but I find that interesting that one of my most ever like widespread commentary posts that I made with insect because I wouldn't really call myself an insect type of guy. Although although I did have a pet arachnid at some point. Because I think they're cool, and I'm actually a big Spider-Man fan, so I always thought of arachnids as like pretty cool creatures in our ecosystem. But I'm very curious to hear like some more of what you do because I don't usually be on here. I don't host spaces. I don't do spaces because I'm a professional documentary filmmaker. I run a studio, or technically two studios full time now. So I can't exactly be producing, documentaries if I'm on spaces all day. So very interesting to see like what else you got going on.
well, let me introduce us. I think everyone else here are longtime guests. What we do is we are the Climate and Ecology Workshop. We typically do two different, or I shouldn't say two, but we are about climate change, climate data, discussing how and both the difference between anthropogenic climate change and natural climate change. So we actually, of all the spaces you're going to see on these topics, we are one of the few that get into the weeds. We do discuss the physics and astrophysics of climate change. We also do a lot of work on ecology. Starting in a couple of weeks, we're going to shift focus to spring and spring bird migration, which also includes spring insect migration. We're going to have in a couple of weeks, the red admirals will start coming south, sorry, north. Why am I saying south? The red admirals will return. The painted ladies will return. We're going to start to get a few weeks after that, you're going to start to get the dragonflies coming back. And I will do quite a few. We're even hoping that eventually I'll be able to do this from the field because it's really hard to host a space if you're out birding. It takes quite a bit of bandwidth and it takes quite a bit of personal attention. And those are exactly the, when you're birding, you can't pay attention to your guests. You can talk to them, but you can't, you can't work a space. So that's pretty much what we generally do. Today uh, we've talked about the insect apocalypse in the past. We wanted to just update that, but we were more okay. In the past, we were more about the butterfly apocalypse. So we're broadening it out today, and we're also going to go into a couple of interesting topics that are kind of connected to it, uh, dealing with the difference that the United States has versus other countries in terms of the insecticides and herbicides that we use that many other countries have banned, uh, obviously because of their possible side effects to mammals, birds, and humans, and why we seem to be, and it's only getting worse now with the Trump administration, we seem to be not interested in promoting good ecological health in this country. We're always more interested in the economics, and it comes back to bite us because we don't understand that the reason why a lot of countries don't want to buy our food is because we have pesticides and hormones that other countries don't use. That we have, uh, we're more into GMO foods than other countries are. And by the way, I'm not against GMO. It's the only thing I have a problem with GMO is that it's generally not to improve the quality of the crop, but its resistance to Roundup.
Oh no, I understand. I mean, it sounds to me that you're more so advocating for awareness and
Yes.
ethical, for lack of a better term, usage of like the way food is being produced. I'm actually South American, and it's interesting that this topic that you're talking about essentially really touches upon a lot of things that I personally have seen firsthand because the sea levels, for example, some of the islands that I know and the places where my family currently resides in, I know for a fact that these islands have shrunk in the last 20 or so years that I've been blessed enough to be alive. And I gotta say, man, like, I never really needed like a pitch or a TED talk to be convinced of like a changing world. Because I grew up on a farm and I was pretty close to animals, and I feel like if you've lived around animals long enough, you tend to tune into their habits and like what they do and like their cycles in the world. And yeah, like birds in particular, I've noticed that like over time there were significantly less birds. And the animals that we did have on the farm over the years, they actually got sicker too because, well, I don't know actually why, but I think to say that it was correlated to the decline of the environment would not be such a stretch in my opinion. But I'm very curious though. Are you guys scientists? Do you study this like as like an official like field of study, like in a university or something?
I'm a retired engineer and scientist, but now I've got a lot of time on my hands. So I've always been in environmental activism. Uh, I shouldn't say activism, habitat restoration. Activism is more talking about it. Habitat restoration is more doing stuff about it. And I've been a serious birder for about 30 years. And as I've said, that there is nothing that brings you closer to the environment than spending hundreds of hours a year searching for birds, flowers, insects. It's harder to search for mammals. Yes, when you see a mammal, you're like, "Yeah, okay," but it's harder to search for them because their ranges are typically wider, and even though they may not have as they may not travel as much per day. They're harder to see because they're trying to avoid being seen. Although I did have a wonderful situation last year where I was birding Central Park, New York, and I was chasing after these two um, uh, hermit thrushes, and I turned a corner, and I was nose to nose to a coyote. I have seen the New York coyotes before. Actually, I see coyotes maybe 3 or 4 times a year, but I had never been this close before. He didn't know I was there. I didn't know he was there. We looked at each other. I don't know which one of us was more afraid. Probably him. I gently backed away and proceeded to tell everybody in Central Park I was nose to nose to a coyote. Uh, but no, okay. So the answer to the question is I was a scientist. Uh, I'm now retired. My specialties, I was an electronic engineer, but we also did a lot of R&D. And part of my R&D was for understanding how sunlight varies throughout the year, which became the basis for this account. This account is 25 cycle, which stands for the 25th cycle of the sunspot cycle. So I would say I'm an advocate, but I'm really more of a distributor of information.
It's so interesting, man. Because I got here because John was the person that I follow, and Twitter tends to send me notifications of spaces that the people I tend to support and what they're talking about. But I wouldn't say, like I said earlier, that I am an active user of spaces. But I will say that recently, a project that fell on my lap is very much related to the environmental decline of not just the U.S., which is where I'm currently based out of, but to a certain extent, the entire global population, I think, is experiencing like a decline of unprecedented scales, at least in my opinion. But I'm not a scientist. I'm just someone who, like I said, I grew up on a farm, and I couldn't help but notice some of these warning signs early on at a very early age. But I think as I've grown older, things have gotten a lot more existential for me. And the project I'm currently doing is dealing with bees, and I took interest in it initially because I got reached out to by this TikTok person. They have a platform over there, and they're a beekeeper. And at first, they just wanted me to do video production for them, as in showcasing, the bees, how they care for them, how they produce honey for them to sell and stuff like that. So I was essentially like the marketing engine for their company. But over time, as I've heard them talk about like the issue of like the declining bee population and the kind of diseases that they may be afflicted by, it really gave me like a bit of an existential crisis. And it made me realize how such small creatures actually carry on their shoulders, quite literally, so much of our ecosystem. And no one either seems to be aware, or if they are aware, maybe they don't seem to like engage with the topic in a way that spreads more awareness. So I'm glad that people like you are doing it. Although
Thank you.
unfortunately, Twitter has changed a lot over the years. It's now ran by an interesting character, to say the least, and I'm gonna leave it at that. But definitely, man, like keep it up. And if you ever need help, like to kind of push more of your message out there, feel free to reach out to me anytime. And this is a cause I hugely resonate with. So whatever support you
Thank
need
you.
in terms of like post production stuff, because I know how to actually take the audio from spaces to then turn into content for Instagram and TikTok and YouTube and stuff like that. So feel free to hit me up, man.
Thank you. To just go into a little more detail of what you've been discussing, the bigger problem seems to be not with wild bees, but with domesticated bees. Uh, and we do have a problem with wild bee. Wild bee populations have diminished with habitat degradation. But domesticated bees are the problem because as we grow more and more of the fruits that require, like stone fruits that require almonds need blueberries. You literally can't grow blueberries without bees. As the need as we grow more and more fruit products that require insect pollination, and as we keep killing all of the moths and butterflies, it's all up to the bees now. So uh, farmers globally are taking their hives from one area to another to pollinate local fields, and they are seeing a significant decline in domesticated bee populations, and a lot of it could be due to uh, the nicotinoids. There's a branch of pesticides which the nicotinoids act like a what you call it. They disrupt chemical processes inside the bees' neurological systems. They are causing declines in population. The other thing which we're still trying to piece together is whether or not these encourage mites to grow. Mites are microscopic little, yeah, they're insects. They're not arachnids. Uh, Microscopic little insects that penetrate hives like a fungus almost, but these are insects, and they grow on the bees' bodies, and eventually they just tire the bees out. This is mostly during the winter. It affects their respiratory systems. The spirochetes get clogged, and eventually the bees prematurely die in late fall. I shouldn't say winter, late summer, late fall, and this dramatically reduces their population, because that's often the time of year where we are doing pollination, where we're bringing the bees in to, to farmers to have their crops pollinated.
One last question for you, because I'm actually currently on 10%, and this is why I don't do spaces. This is why I don't do spaces because it literally drained my battery so fast.
Rescue
But
batteries.
but yeah, I was curious to know, like, do you broadcast this anywhere else? Do you have like a place where you
No,
curate your past
we're just
episodes,
we are
or?
we are just here. Although I will say that people have been hijacking our feed and putting it on YouTube.
I mean, it doesn't really surprise me because technically there are tools out there that allow you to either rebroadcast or repurpose the audio itself. I know OBS is a very popular one that a lot of people use. I'm not too sure like where the copyright law falls on that, but from what I understand, according to the current head of Twitter, they're saying that any content produced by users on the platform technically is like free real estate for Twitter or X to use for AI training purposes. So anything from your text to your photos to your videos to the audio you produce on here technically is the property of Elon Musk, and they can take free license to train on it as much as they want. So we'll see how things go. But personally, I'm a big podcast listener. A lot of the stuff I listen to and catch up on are usually done through podcast. And if this is a topic you ever consider doing into like a proper, long format kind of podcast, like definitely will subscribe because I think this is something, like I said, it's really important. A lot of people should be engaging with it, and more importantly, I think you kind of have like an interesting way of explaining these things when it comes to the nitty gritty of it all. Because I'm by no means an expert. I'm just someone who's, I guess, naturally is adjacent to a lot of industries by virtue of what I do as a filmmaker. So yeah, man, like very interesting stuff you got going on, and I will try and jump off before my phone dies on me.
Oh, excuse me, Nikki. Thank you for coming by before your phone dies on you. I would like to talk with you further, maybe another time, and you could tell us possibly about what it was like growing up on the farm and comparing what your experience was then, and possibly, if you've been going back in the last couple of years as to what it is now. But I just wanted to pick up on something you said. I'm not a scientist. I just have found out about the biodiversity crisis and climate crisis, and was curious to find out a lot more about it to see what it is that I could do about it. So basically, for me, it's just like a passion to learn more about biodiversity and the climate crisis, because I care about nature and also about people too. But I think this feeling, that you said you had, that it feels like things have gotten worse, in terms of, the insect abundance. You're right. And I think, for people who have spent time in nature, you do develop an awareness of it, perhaps that people that live in urban environments don't. But even within urban environments, there has to be maybe at a subconscious level that people are realizing what's happened to the grasshoppers. Because I remember thinking when I was a child in the summertime, there were grasshoppers all over the place. And then when I was bringing my own children to parks, um, I was thinking, I used to play catching the grasshoppers, and there's none here. What's going on? And sure enough, one of the most threatened species of insects are the class that grasshoppers belong to. If you look at the International Union for the Conservation of Nature's Red List of Threatened Species, which has the world's most comprehensive information on global extinction risks, status of animals, plant species, insects, fungus, you name it. What this feeling that you have that something is amiss is spot on. Biodiversity is declining. They have about 160,000 species on the list, and more than 40,000 of these species are threatened with extinction. Just to give you an example, 41% of all amphibians, 36% of reef building corals, 34% of conifer trees, 12% of birds. And as we're going to get into further in this space, the insect numbers have been declining, uh, like the late 80s. But yeah, there's something amiss, and it's what they call, I guess, it's a trophic cascade, but it's going from the bottom up rather than the top down. So it's, if we lose the insects, we lose so much. And uh, for humanity, not only in the value of insect of because they are life and they deserve to be alive and to exist, but we rely on them, like Sal was saying, for our food and for decomposing things in the soil and for adding to the soil, and well, there's so many services that they offer to us. So that's what I find fascinating about them.
Yeah, I can actually brave the waters real quick and kind of tell you a little bit about my backstory because I'm still at like 9% right now, so I have about like 7 more to go. So basically, my parents actually surprisingly are not farmers. They actually are part of the radio industry. They were showrunners for a pretty popular show in South America that reached over 5 million people, give or take, on a weekly scheduled show called Seashell. Well, it wasn't literally called Seashell, but like in our local language, translated in English, that's what it literally means. And they were talking from everything from current events to politics to oddly enough, both animal and nature advocacy. And I guess through exposure, being dragged along to the studio as a young child, listening to them talking about these issues with some of the experts they've had on their radio show, I can't lie, I actually learned a lot. So eventually, my father at the time expressed an interest in wanting to buy land, and when he did, he basically overhauled everything. I mean, like the guy, credit where it's due, like for context, he's from the 60s and 70s. That's the time he grew up in. In our culture, like it's not uncommon for people to very much like care about tending to the land, but this guy took it to the next level. I mean, he basically built us an off the grid house. We had all our needs catered for. We had food grown. We had our animals cared for. We had solar panels. We had I forgot how the name of this thing is. Like those like big turbine that would like generate energy. I mean,
Wind
he
turbine.
literally had everything set up. Yeah, like because like he has like a background in engineering as well. So I'm
Mhm.
guessing like he figured, well, I'm an engineer, so I'm just gonna do what engineers do and basically build shit. So yeah, because of that, like it definitely gave me an appreciation for nature very early on in the sense of not only what it can do for you and what it looks like in practice when you live in harmony with the land, but also what can happen when you essentially focus on sustainable living. Because we never, at least that I remember, we never really had an issue of producing too much or running out of stuff. We only just had enough to provide for our needs. And I gotta say, the culture shock for me when I moved away from my home country to the United States was the fact that the overconsumption culture here is actually very massive to the point where when I got my first job in a restaurant, I remember very vividly at a pizza shop in New York. I was working there at this place called Artichoke, and apparently it's very common to just take dozens, if not hundreds of pounds worth of pizzas and food and all sorts of other stuff and throw it all away. And I would say, hey, do y'all, is it bad or like, does this not meet any like food or health safety standards? And they said, no, actually, what's happening is that we are legally required by law to throw everything away because we cannot either afford to deal with lawsuits if someone ends up getting sick from them if we give them away and stuff like that. So you know, I'm not one to judge in terms of, you know, how people live culturally speaking, but I can't lie. Like, it definitely rubs me the wrong way when I'm comparing the life I used to be part of, where I would, you know, collect the eggs from the chickens on the farm, and I would, you know, get myself a glass of milk from the cow that lived on our farm as well. You know, that was very standard for us to do. But here, like even if I don't know if you guys like heard the news like a while back, if I recall correctly, that was in Texas. They had like a significant weather event over there, and people were starving, so they resorted to basically raiding the garbage disposals at the local malls and stores, and they were met with resistance because they had a task force essentially told to supervise these like garbage bins to ensure that people would not take from them. So the stock culture of overconsumption contrasted with the complete inability for some of these infrastructures to provide for the people's needs. You know, that always stood out to me as something that is a very pressing issue, especially in the age of you know, technology, where we can do amazing things with our technology. I'm sure you know by now. You know, when you compare what we can do today with our phones to what we could do 30 years ago, it's literally night and day. On our phone, we can reach literally millions of people at any given time. So I've always thought of, you know, these tools not as a curse but as a blessing, because like if you took what we have now to the Middle Ages, that would be basically wizardry. Like, what do you mean that we can talk in a live broadcast with, you know, dozens of strangers across the internet? You know, that's basically wizard stuff going on. So I really hope that things will change for the better. I try to be optimistic, but like I said, it's really it can be easy to be fall into nihilism when you get exposed to a lot of bad news on social media. So that's where I kind of limit my usage of it. But overall, I would say that like the advocacy for both the animals and the environment, you know, has not dwindled down, especially in the midst of people who have experienced severe weather events. Because I lived in Florida at some point, and I can tell you, having lived there firsthand in 2016 and 2017, I've noticed that like as someone who've lived through hurricanes before, the kind of hurricanes that Florida was being hit with were really not. They were unusual, really. You don't really see these kind of weather events where floods, are like basically like waist high, and the entire infrastructures were shut down. Powers were cut off. A lot of people died, unfortunately, during these events. So it's just something that I think should be taken seriously, and I'm really glad that people like you are spreading the word and letting people know that, hey, like, if we don't deal with this now, it's going to be a bigger problem later on.
Yes. There's not much more to say with it. I do want to add one quick note. My wife volunteers occasionally for the Friendly Fridge in the Bronx, and we get a lot of food from restaurants that they actually set aside. If they make 100 of a meal, they might take 20 of those meals and set them aside for charities, and they deliver it to the Friendly Fridge, and then we distribute it. So some restaurants really do care, and they know in advance, if they're because the reason why sometimes that restaurants do specials is because they can buy something much cheaper in larger quantities, so they'll make extra food, and if they can't sell, they will, before it's thrown out, they will donate it. So there are avenues for it. But yes, most of the food is discarded. Something in the realm of 40% in the United States of produce is destroyed because it is unappetizing to look at. It's not that the food is bad, it's that it's just ugly. And that is absolutely mind-boggling.
Yeah, man. Like, so hopefully, I think overall the culture is changing. Like, I think older folks, not to put any of y'all on the spot, tend to dog on TikTok a lot, saying that it's full of teenagers doing silly dances, which is true to some extent. But I gotta say, as someone who's done collaboration with said teenagers on the TikTok platform for what I do as a filmmaker, and a video producer, I was actually very surprised by how aware they were with these issues. Like, a lot of them were a big advocate of the environment, progressive legal stances when it comes to human rights and stuff like that, especially in regards of warfare. I'm sure some of you have heard about the current ongoing war that's happening over in Russia and the Ukraine, and it seems to me that, like, a lot of their issue in terms of like a demographic was due to the fact that all these bombs being blown up it's contributing to impacting the ozone layer, and they were basically advocating for the incoming presidency to address that in some way, shape, or form. I'm not sure how effective that will be in the long term, but what I do know is that these younger people who are either soon to be adults or already adults, legally speaking, they're aware, and they very much spread that same message of like, hey, consume mindfully, and really make sure that you hold the people that represent you accountable, because they're really big on that. And, these guys regularly do trends where they'll call their local representatives and governors and tell them what they care about. And these are like 17, 16, sometimes even 13-year-olds doing this on TikTok. And some of their videos get shared over 20 million times. It's kind of insane when you think about it. So that spoke to what I was saying earlier in terms of the power of the technology we now have, where someone can literally make a post today, and within the next day, it has been seen by basically the population of an entire country. So I think a lot of people in the 10 to next 20-year cycle are very much going to be as devoted, if not more zealous, when it comes to the issue of nature conservation and animal advocacy, and just overall like sustainable living. To be honest with you, so that at least I'm very optimistic about.
As
Um,
I'm fond of saying, the world's most famous 20-year-old who is not a footballer is Greta Thunberg.
oh, very true.
Oh, you are right. I never thought of her that way, but she is technically Gen Z, so you are correct.
Yeah,
So
that's That's so true. Greta, everyone has props for Greta, so to speak. I mean, it's interesting what you're talking about with TikTok and about basically uh, maybe like social cues or peer pressure where young people are taking the cues from other young people. And this is propelling activism on a variety of issues. I was recently reading an article from Nature about science communication by H. Najendra. And I believe it's a she. She was talking about first of all, she created a climate crisis and sustainability education center in India. And what she found was that, you know, young people, they do have an awareness of nature, especially because, probably a few years earlier as younger children, they were playing with bugs and trying to catch butterflies. So there's like in terms of time span, they are close to nature, but also that they're more likely to take on a project or, to be positively influenced to learn about a subject when there's other young people available and they're given an active role in it. I have some experience with Suzuki music education, which is based on the part of the philosophy is that children learn by being around other children that are doing the same thing and they're very motivated. So, you have a group of 7-year-olds that'll play the violin or piano or cello together for a few hours every week. Um, and a huge motivating factor behind that is the fact that there are other children their age and also children, older as role models for them. So I think playing out on TikTok or Twitter or social media, that is definitely, an avenue for science communication and science education awareness.
Yeah, and last thing I'll say on that topic is I'm quite literally at 4%, so I'm not gonna push my luck any further. One of the trends I've noticed as of late actually is that scientists have been gaining a lot of foothold in the creator economy space. In short, that basically means people who basically command attention in terms of either sponsorship or brand deals. It previously used to be that celebrities held that space in terms of like who gets the spotlight. But to my surprise, a lot of folks that are very well respected in the academia community have been getting a lot of traction lately. One of which being a fellow named by the name of Dr. Andrew Huberman. He's a neuroscientist and neurologist, if I recall correctly, and I think he's just about to cross 10 million subscribers on YouTube. And he only started, if I recall correctly, 3 years ago. So it's very interesting that like scientists are getting that kind of visibility. And I'm hoping to see people in other fields follow suit because credit where it's due to him, he did not just dedicate his podcast that he has on his platform on YouTube to only talk about neurology and psychology. He actually has featured a variety of people, including behavioral therapists, speech pathologists, if I recall correctly, athletes, folks who specialize in the realm in the domain of like language. So he's covered a wide variety of things. I don't recall if he's quite featured someone who deals with like nature advocacy just yet, but I would not be surprised if he would feature someone like that because his podcast is like the gold standard of like basically the entire scientific world kind of getting together and convening and discussing really important topics that a lot of people either don't really know much about or perhaps would like to know more about, but like unfortunately don't have access to learn more because science papers are usually get kept behind a paywall. So it's very interesting that like scientists like himself have been really pushing this agenda to really educate the masses at like a very large scale. So I really commend what you guys are doing on your end. no matter big or small, in terms of educating the masses. Because it may not seem like much, but overall, I very much will say that it makes a difference.
That's what we're here
Thank,
for.
thank you, Nikki. I just want to mention the scientists I think, are understanding how social media works and how should I put, celebrity status works. Because I know, maybe Sal can remember this. I don't remember it exactly, but I know a few years ago there were insects named after Lady Gaga, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and it might have been Pink Floyd as well. So they're definitely trying to, gain interest for people to start appreciating insects and adoring insects in hopes that, people will want to save them.
I can imagine a Lady Gaga insect would probably be one that spends a lot of time in pupa, and then it starts as a caterpillar, and then well, starts as an egg, then becomes a caterpillar, and then pupates, and then becomes a butterfly. I don't think she'd be one of those gradual insects that just molt 4 or 5 times and just keep on going bigger and bigger and bigger. I think they'd give her something that would undergo spectacular change.
Absolutely. I'll try to find the name of that insect.
We will, by the way, we will do butterflies, and I don't mean in the abstract as we're doing now. Uh, in a few weeks, when they become part of the landscape here in New York, I'm going to report on what I see. I will I will discuss the Red Admiral migration, the uh, painted ladies migrate. Of course, we always do monarchs, but monarchs will be probably late July. We will discuss when they start to come in. They're not non-migratory, but one of the most spectacular local butterflies are the tiger swallowtails. They're these gigantic, beautiful yellow, black, and white insects that typically show up middle of maybe even early May, and they're and I think his phone just died.
Oh no!
Uh,
Oh, it was really nice to talk with him. There is
okay,
some exciting news about the monarchs, though, that just came out. That apparently their numbers are up for the eastern monarch in their overwintering site in Mexico. So that's good. I think it increased by let's say 40% since last year.
hopefully because this was a La Nina winter, and winter temperatures are so delicate for them. Too hot and they crash. Too cold and they crash. So this was a relatively mild winter, and they did okay. Uh, all right. So if anybody, you guys have seen the poll, you still have time to vote on your favorite um, invertebrate.
Oh, let me check that out. I'm going to see where we're at with that, and I'll try to post that. Is it up in the pill up there? I have no idea. I did see on my phone. I can't see what I put up there, so I'll have to check.
The insect, by the way, from what I'm seeing in the last few years, it has gotten much worse, and I'm sure all of us have seen this. Those of us who've lived long enough lives. I remember I used to summer upstate New York, not on a farm, but as close to a farm as you can get. Uh, you don't want to be downwind of a chicken farm. And and when I was young, butterflies and moths were extremely common. And something happened, I want to say sometime in the late 80s, and populations started to decline. There's a very famous paper on this and book on this that I think it started in Germany and then went into the UK. Robert probably knows about this. That people were looking at car windshields, and they were noticing that when they took trips, they were much cleaner in the summer than they used to be in the past. And it wasn't just because cars are more aerodynamic and brush the insects aside. They are now just simply not hitting as many insects when they fly, when the insects fly when the cars drive. So this is an anecdotal, but this was in many respects like a first warning of people noticing that there were dramatic reductions. I remember when I was young. Well, I remember we all remember when we were young. Uh, the number of uh, what are they called again? Uh, Lightning bugs that you'd go out and you'd go out, well, let's say, a half an hour before sunset, and they'd start. And then by the time, it was sunset or an hour or two after sunset, the ground would be filled with them, and you could see them just sparking all over the place. And maybe 30 years ago, they all but vanished. I will say that I do see a lot more now than I did in the last 20 years. So they seem to be making a comeback. Uh, but is it long lived? We can only hope.
I agree with you, Sal. About 8 years ago, I went to Ithaca, New York, with my son, and we
I hear it's
stayed there.
gorgeous.
Oh, it is. I love there.
Gorgeous.
I would go there tomorrow. It's got so many waterfalls and gorges and beautiful state parks. It's beautiful. I love New York State. Um, well, the funny thing was, I don't think he's really ever experienced fireflies where we lived in basically midtown Toronto. And even here, now that I live in the suburbs, actually, the last few summers, I've noticed it's it's in the neighborhoods that people aren't treating their lawns as much, and I feel, and also that they like the conifer trees. But anyways, we were walking through Ithaca College because they have a waterfall there, and there were fireflies everywhere, and he just loved it, and I loved it too. And yeah, I think you're right. They might be making a comeback. Definitely. How about anybody else? Hi, John. John. But
Fireflies
also the
are gone. Sorry, I just realized, Kim. My family came from the Midwest of the United States. So I didn't grow up around them a lot, but I remember visiting the farm. It makes me so
The, the
sad.
east
No
the, the
fireflies.
east the East Coast population crashed about 30 years ago. They used to be super abundant. It completely crashed. I think, I mean, anecdotal. They're making a comeback, but they're still a tiny fraction of what they were in the past.
Sorry to butt in. Hi, everyone. I've been enjoying listening,
Hello.
but the loss of fireflies zipped into my brain and made me unmute.
Oh, it's a shock. It really is. If you're of a certain age, sorry, and you
Well,
grew up
yes.
watching them.
Excuse me. I am of a certain age, but that's like that's child. I mean, fireflies. Like
Exactly, exactly.
what
You
Kim
you
said.
grew up with them.
Yeah, and I mean, I've got grandsons as paleontologist 1 and paleontologist 2, and they're always out. But I haven't thought of it that way. And of course, my daughter, their mom, has a PhD in plant physiology, and the dad's an ecologist. So they're always out observing everything of what's ever there. But I hadn't thought. I'm going to have to think about that one. And I grew up in a neighborhood where we would play in the creeks, and there were newts and crawdads. We call them crawdaddies, and I'm in the Pacific Northwest, not. But that's really, you're right. It's kind of like, what's that slowly boiling frog thing? And I'm a gardener too, where you track, last freeze date, things like that. But it is sort of the slow. Oh, I feel like I need to say a prayer now or something. It happens so slowly in a way.
I summered upstate New York, but other than that, I lived in New York City or the immediate suburbs of New York City my entire life. And I remember going back about 40 years ago, we were in Bayside, which is it's New York. I mean, it is a more suburban part of New York City. And I remember starting a little later than now, let's say early April until November, there were bats in the sky every single night around sunset. Every single night we had bats, and now there are no bats. I have seen them in Central Park, but that's about it.
I actually have bats in my backyard. I'm so happy. Well, I'm
You
also
do?
kind of afraid
Oh
of
my
them. I
God.
do. I
Oh.
do. I don't know where they, where they have their nest or their roost. But in the summertime, basically right around sunset, they're swooping down, and I believe they help with the mosquito population.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, and I have a swimming pool, so I think somehow that interacts with the
Oh,
mosquitoes
yes.
and these bats. But I think probably I've noticed them for the past 4 years now, and I hope they're going to come back this year.
You can buy bat boxes. They're relatively long, like a 7 or 8 to 1 aspect ratio. You just hammer them up on a tree or very gently, or you put them on a post, and bats can discover them and say, hey, this is a nice place to make a living, and they will inhabit your boxes.
I want you to
No,
So you
that's a
know
good
can
idea.
track them.
you've
That
inspired me, and I have gotten a few days ago my binoculars out and my a birding book. So thank you. And then I also came here to just rain on your parade and talk about avian flu and wild bird populations. But we don't have to go there
We
yet.
we we've New York has been hit badly. Central Park has been hit very badly by avian flu. We've lost a great deal of well, so far it's just the crows and Canada geese. Sorry about that.
I'll try to post some stuff on it because I'm following people who really are following it hard. And of course, H5N1, all of that. But migratory patterns of the wild birds are, what's
Yes,
Can you
happening.
it's about to it is about to hit. Yes, Daniel, did you want to say anything?
can you hear me out? Hello, hello. Can you hear me?
Um,
Little
all right.
bit,
Okay,
kind of
so let's
echoey.
yeah.
Okay.
That's. I think he has
I'm
an
here.
extremely. I think he has an extremely bad connection, and it's coming in and coming out.
Okay. There's a bad connection in this place. Can you
Well, welcome to the climate and ecology space.
I have some information to you people.
Please,
Hello.
yes, you're
yes, please proceed.
Okay. How prepared about the GCRs coming up that Donald Trump have advised? Hello.
didn't quite catch that.
Can you please say that again?
Okay. How prepared about the GCR is coming up that Donald Trump have advised?
Oh, something about Trump. Continue on.
GCR. I hope you are already.
Well, in the last few days, there has been discussion about the essential the destruction of the EPA, or rather the disenfranchisement of the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. Essentially, they're no longer going to ensure clean air and clean water, and they're going to consider climate science as no longer an important part of the United States' scientific agenda. And
Okay.
well, the fact of the matter is, there's nothing we can do about it per se, but a lot of companies are not going to agree with this. And the reason why is that there is still no cheaper way to generate electricity than solar
You
power or
know
onshore
about
wind.
that.
It's for your own safety. I've already done my own. It's for your own safety.
Well, we're going to obviously what's going to happen is the world is going to have to literally work around us. But they will, because again, as I said, it's the economics of power, generation, transportation, and storage are clearly showing
No,
that the future is
that
not
one
fossil fuels. The
no.
future is renewable power, especially wind and solar. And the main advantage is it's decentralized. And you would think that someone who believes so firmly in competition, or so
Don't
as he
say
claims,
that. What I
that
what I mean is that what I mean is that how prepared are you of these upcoming bank crashes?
I'm not hearing you properly.
Are you saying bank rushes? Are you saying
Yeah.
bank? I'm not prepared at all.
Uh, I think what's
I'll
going to
be,
happen
you know,
is
up Sheets Creek if something like that happens.
I think what's going to happen is what typically happens. You're going to have
Yes.
a
It's going to
a
happen.
major
It's
you're
going to
going to have
happen.
a major disruption in the economy, which will be relatively
I can
brief
hear you.
because then
Speak
things are
louder.
going to change. We're going to, because right now we're not quite in what we call correction phase in the stock markets, and the economy is not just the stock market, but the stock market is essentially a predictor of what's going to happen next. So if you see stocks falling, that's because uh, investors are saying they don't have confidence in the future. What I think is going to happen is that people are going to withdraw. They're going to look inward. They're not going to look to spend a lot of money. They're not going to do home renovations. They're not going to do big vacations. They're not going to do major expenditures. They're going to try to save money because they're afraid of what's going to happen. And what that then that of course what happens when people stop spending money is you start to have recession. Once you have recession, then policies immediately change because uh, obviously people are going to get to Trump and they're going to tell him, you cannot do this anymore. You
Correct.
cannot
Well,
have
Sal,
50% tariffs on materials.
Wait.
Sal,
I have something.
hang on a sec.
What I mean
Okay,
is
go
that
ahead.
you have to take an immediately backup to your account to set up your QFS account before to rate. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you for that. I appreciate that. That's very true. What I find very, I guess, oxymoronic about the Trump administration is he halted all funding for solar projects, for EVs, for EV charging stations, and now
Yes,
he's got the
I'm
Teslas
away.
right in front of
And
the White House and
Yes,
and
I'm
telling
away.
people to buy them. Sal, what is this all
they,
about?
they, they essentially stopped construction, almost completed, on 800 EV chargers at federal offices. And now it's like, oh, but you got to buy Teslas. Yeah, but
Nobody's
why,
going to buy a
why
Tesla if they can't charge their car. We have to be able to charge the cars. We have if I'm going to buy an EV, I have to know that I can charge it.
And the thing is that they literally spent 99% of the money necessary to put these chargers in, and then they're pulling them, which is 100% waste of that money, except for the companies that sold them. So this whole Doge, this whole idea. Let's be
Hello,
really frank. Yes, we're still here.
hello. If anyone else need more information about this, should follow me. I have some information about that. Okay, is that all right?
Yes, thank you very much.
So let's get back to the subject at hand.
What do you say?
No, we're trying to get back to the subject on the main topic today. We always try to have topic discipline. We rarely succeed, but we're going to try to shift back to the topic of the insect apocalypse and how that affects people, how that affects our entire lifestyle in terms of because insects are responsible for food production. Well, shouldn't say responsible. They help support food production. They help support a lot of our uh, their economics because, after all, if you don't have a food infrastructure, if you have to import your food, that is very, very bad for your nation's economy. If you put farmers out of work, it is not advantageous. So we are trying to do what we can about uh, improving the effectivity of the interface between the natural world and the agricultural world, which is why we're discussing today about the insect apocalypse and the effects that the secondary knockoff effects of the insect apocalypse, such as serious decline in bird populations, because birds are the primary predator of insects. So if you're going you need insects for pollination, but you also have problems with insects who are eating your food. So there's this uh, dichotomy here where you're trying to do both at the same time. You're trying to support them and yet reduce their threat. And when we use pesticides are it's a it's not a it's not a scalpel approach. It's kind of like Doge. Uh, Pesticides don't carefully inspect the arena. They don't excise only the problem. They are systemic. So when we have when we abuse pesticides, we are not just killing the beneficial the pest insects. We are also killing the beneficial insects. We are also killing spiders and arachnids, and I think that's a dichotomy. Sorry, that's spiders, arachnids, invertebrates that are all part of the food chain or the support chain. We can't uh, if we don't use a clean and effective approach to how to raise our crops more efficiently, we are going to cause more harm than good. And maybe it is time that we look into avenues of farming that don't require as much pesticides, or we have to start looking more into vertical farming and indoor farming for a lot of our food needs. I think that's because I was discussing this with someone a couple of days ago that Walmart is apparently starting. They're not, sorry, I shouldn't say Walmart. They're using old Walmarts for indoor farming. And I mentioned that Walmart has two advantages. a lot of Walmarts made in the last few years use what's called light harvesting. Light harvesting techniques are essentially you have instead of a complete and total roof overhead, you use solar use windows. What are they called again? Well, you allow sunlight to come in through windows on the roof.
Skylights?
Skylights. Thank you. So you have sensors inside the Walmart, any building actually. You have sensors, and they're constantly monitoring the light levels inside the building. And when they need to add light, they just simply increase the voltage on the LEDs. If the sun is doing enough of a job, they don't. They just throttle it back, and they barely ever use the artificial lighting at all. Now, of course, with when you're trying to do internal when you're trying to grow plants indoors, you need a lot of light. But it helps if you have a situation where you already have an automated system that allows you to do however many lux of light you think are best for your crops. And we're going to have to start talking about this possibly in the next 2 weeks, because I'm starting my indoor crop. I don't know how many people here have homes that they can plant outdoor crops. I shouldn't say crop, but yeah, crops. Go ahead, might as well. We grow tomatoes, we grow eggplant, we grow lettuce. Which reminds me, I have about 1 million lettuce seeds. we, we do a lot of rhubarb, asparagus. So we're getting ready. Probably tomorrow. This weekend,
Oh,
we're going to start to plant our seeds for 2025 season.
great. That's one thing I wanted to ask you. So you're going to start like next week with your seeds. Um, do you put them in little peat, or I guess maybe not peat, but biodegradable containers that you could put directly into the garden?
No, we use very, very ultra thin plastic. Yes, I know it's plastic. You can reuse the plastic. We use ultra thin plastic, very, very tiny little cups, and we have them. We have. I'm going to walk over to my. We used to be a dining room. It's now essentially an exercise room. We have 3 different shelves right now. Oh boy, that really looks bad. The cilantro was doing terrible, but that's okay. That's the indoor cilantro. We're not. That's not going to go outdoors, because right now we have our winter crop, and the winter crop is just thyme, cilantro, basil. That's just something that we use when every once in a while. I'll snip off a piece of parsley, and we'll put that in some food. Same with all the others. That's our winter herb crop. We have banks of LED lights. The banks of LED lights are on timers. They are on for 14 hours a day. You do not want to exceed 14 hours a day. It screws the plants up. A lot of That's something we have to talk about later also. With plants, the way that they grow, photopause is a very, very serious issue. Once you start to lose the amount of light every day, that's a warning to the plant that fall is coming. So the plant figures out, all right, time to stop growing and to produce fruits. So this is all how you have to carefully plan when you're doing your indoor gardens, or if you're doing vertical gardening, if you're doing mass production of plants for food purposes. Uh, Everything has to be controlled, especially the light level and especially the temperature. But anyway, that's for the next few weeks actually. Although this comes, this does have pertinence.
I think that'll be a great topic. I've also read in the last couple of days about that they're putting greenhouses on top of these Walmarts, and I thought they were like operating Walmarts. So I thought, oh, that's really interesting. But they're doing growing indoor greenhouses, and I think they also have solar panels on top of there. So that's being innovative. Sal, you were mentioning earlier about the windshields. I think that was in Denmark. The countryside of Denmark. They
So
found
that was the first splat index.
Yes, that the insects were down 97%. One interesting thing that I thought was really important to discuss is that it seems like, most of these studies that are measuring butterfly abundance or insect abundance, most of them are happening in preserved nature areas. Now, that's great, and it's also horrible because these are the huge losses occurring. But what about, in the areas where nature isn't preserved? It's got to be even worse.
There was an extraordinary paper about 3 years ago, which I've discussed on other spaces, and they found out, to their amazement, that cities are actually better for supporting a broader range of insects than either farms or manicured suburbia. Because in cities, you have small parks, and then you have just, let's say outdoor areas where people plant trees for shade and don't have, it's not heavily managed. And then you go to the homes in suburbia, and they're all front lawns, and they're all essentially, just a monocolony of monoculture of Kentucky bluegrass. So what happens is that because there is so little uh, there is so little diversity that's available to people in their local areas. They cannot give support to plants, to insects.
Right. Like this,
Widgets.
the bluegrass seed that they're selling at Home Depot, Canadian Tire, whichever, I guess hardware store, wherever they sell seed, it's not supporting insects per se, because I think mainly it's only rabbits that are eating this grass, right? I mean, there's no diversity there, and many insects have co-evolved with certain types of plants that and birds as well, that they basically only pollinate and eat those type of plants. So if we only have Kentucky bluegrass grass, that's right there is going to take away the food for those
Yeah,
insects.
you're then limited to however few species perform well on those grasses. So whatever caterpillars like that grass, that's pretty much all you're going to have. But
Right.
in city parks where they're not very heavily managed, and sometimes they have a combination of planted planted uh, decorative flowers and wildflowers. You get that combination. They support more species. I one of my favorite places to bird is Rockefeller State Park. It's about 15 miles north of here, 24 kilometers north of here, and it is okay. They have a world class peony garden. That I but it's only small. It's only for a few weeks a year. But the rest of it is completely unmanaged. So it is just Mother Nature. It is absolutely wild. They don't even take care of, if trees are downed, they let them stay down. Uh, I know that there's this cry that we have to manage forests and we have to rake the leaves. Yeah, but if you manage a forest, you're taking away all of that biomatter, that those trees that have fallen, that biomatter is going to be used by the next generation of trees. So if you rake the forest, you end up having dead forests. You can't, you can't just you now, if you're gonna do controlled burns, that's one thing, because in a controlled burn, you do return the nutrients back to the soil. But if you're going to take those trees and just, put them in a landfill, you are getting rid of all of that biomass. It is not the way to manage parks. So this is a whole situation that the United States
Right.
is
And
really
well, also,
having problems with.
that's so also those dead trees and the dead branches and leaves and everything like that's food for the
Yes,
decomposers, right? That's food
yes,
for and they're putting that back into the soil and making our 6 inches of dirt that sustains us all full of nutrients. So that's I think that's probably,
right.
I would say, one of the most important services that insects do for us and invertebrates is soil management, basically.
Exactly. You need to let the decomposers get at those trees, especially termites, worms. You need them to break it down to return back to topsoil. And if you're going to get rid of everything, you're never going to get topsoil. This is let's go back in history, 95 years ago. The United States started to mechanize farming. So you had these gigantic tractors that they came in and they denuded the almost all of the 1 million square miles of the Great Prairie Lands. So you had that's 2.5 million square kilometers of prairie that was converted into farmland. And when you drive tractors, especially we're talking about the heavy tractors, because back then, a 30 horsepower engine weighed about, a ton. It's now 30 horsepower engine is the size of my Starbucks cup. Uh, so they compacted the soil. All of the water was pushed out of it. They destroyed the topsoil, and the prairie lands were marginal. They never received more than a few inches of rain a year. They were not they were not designed by Mother Nature to run crop year after year after year. So eventually, what happened was the Dust Bowl. They completely stripped all of the topsoil, almost all of the topsoil, from the Great Plains. And then by running tractors over it, they compressed the earth. They got rid of all of the moisture out of it. Essentially, you turned it into clay, and we had the greatest economic catastrophe this country ever had. And I shouldn't say it that way. It was a great catastrophe because you already had the Depression. And then upon the Depression, you then added the Dust Bowl. So you had one economic failure. People then tried to support their families by farming, and that became the second economic failure. Puppy.
Yeah, um, I was just thinking of my father. Johann had his father Einar came here and took native land through the Homestead Act. That's another deep grief and conversation. But he was a stonemason and a farmer. And anyway, through chain migration, the Norwegian part of my family ended up in what we called North Dakota on those lands. And literally, to hear it was a generation of 8 of them. And most of them are dead now. But to and my dad describe what you just described, it just sounds biblical. It's like, waves of green, and then all of a sudden cracks opened the earth, hordes of locusts, hawk and they had everything was barter, and anyway, he took the family income for the year. It was when the market crashed on a train loaded up to Chicago, where the big stockyards and everything were, and the market had crashed. So there was no one to buy the meat. And one of the family stories, which I know to be true because they all lived there, was he did whatever he could to butcher that meat and give it away so that, people who needed to eat it. But I mean, literally, that guy who was grifting in the space earlier, maybe he's sincere. Follow me, I have the answer if your banks collapse. But I mean, in that, and Kim was like, he said, how would you be if everything collapsed? I think your hand popped up. So to look at, climate migration. So the reason I'm in the part of this continent that I am, essentially, is because it began with those huge, massive changes, and anybody who lives in California knows about it. And interestingly, the kind of music I'm exploring, there's a whole thing about those cultures and peoples who were admittedly mostly transplants to this nation, but the effects of that. And it's really fascinating hearing what you're saying about the prairie and wondering, at least if the equipment they were using, the tractors weren't the big corporate industrial ones at first, right? And I'm wondering how much restoration. I know there are restoration projects, or, attempts to be made to the prairie, but I was thinking of what they used to call windbreaks when I visit the farm. And for those of you in UK, hedges. I'm sorry, I'm not awake. I'm not hedgerows. Thank you. And there was, like I said, I spent some time there as a kid. There were fireflies, and there was plenty of unkept land. At least what I personally saw in my where I visited. You know what I mean? There were lazy rivers, and so it wasn't as just wall to wall plows and whatever. There was wildlife too. But anyway, those are my random thoughts. Thank you so much for this topic.
The way that they were back then, you didn't have corporate farmers. You didn't have. I think there are some farms in Texas and Oklahoma that are the size of small EU countries, and that's not a joke. Actually, more like medium-sized EU countries, not just not just like the Luxembourg size, not Vatican City. So yes, back then, you had the old joke of 40 acres and a mule. You had a small 40-acre farm. They used mechanized farming. But there were the early combines, not the big, 100 meter across combines that they have nowadays. They were just, little small tractors
And we had
with probably 20 horsepower engines.
Yeah, I lost a pitchfork once in a hay. All that wasn't automatically done. Now that I'm thinking about it, right? And they were small, and that was all broken. That could have had our policies been otherwise, right? I'm guessing that whole land shift from what happened with the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. I wonder who bought that up. But it's so heartbreaking. Yeah, the family farm, right? That used to be a thing.
Family farms pretty much can no longer function unless they are going to specialties. Yes, you can still do a family farm, but you pretty much have to sell it yourself at farmers markets or farm stands. You can't just,
probably organics.
Unless you can do it if you service restaurants. So that does help.
Yeah, what you're talking about, it brings me back to John Steinbeck's novel, The Grapes of Wrath, which I have to say is, I think, one of the most iconic novels about environmental collapse and climate migration that's have ever been written. Because, here's these people that were farmers, they were doing well, and drought comes along, and it's not just them, it's millions of other people that are really at the mercy of the land, and they had to move because of that, and they realized that wasn't the answer either, because everybody else was doing that.
Deirdre, join us.
Yeah, just got back from San Francisco, got to meet Michael Mann. It was fun. Anyway, there's, the Western US, there was a big drought in the plains. So what happened, there's an interesting history of Floyd Dominy, who became commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation. But his family was part of the folks who, they expanded during a wetter period to farm, with rain-fed cropping, and then it was in the end of the 19th century I believe that, there was a big North American drought, and a bunch of those people just had abandoned their farms. And it is reminding me, so we're in the middle of a mega drought in the Southwest, and there's in the Southwest U.S., and there's indications it's correlated with La Nina-like conditions in the Pacific. Like the Southwest climate scientists have done studies, and all of the historic mega droughts in North and South America are correlated with persistent La Nina-like conditions. And the Western Pacific is warming faster than the Eastern Pacific, and they're starting to figure out that it's those trends are partly forced. And unfortunately, Zach Labe, they're teasing it out of the climate models using artificial intelligence. And unfortunately, Zach Labe was working on that, and he just got laid off. And I'm really sad because it's part of this ForceMIP project where they're comparing, different methods for teasing out signals of anthropogenic forcing in climate, and particularly the west to east sea surface temperature gradient. It's there's a new paper out today in Science too, which shows it's completely outside the CMIP6 models. So it's still this emerging area of science. And yeah, these mega droughts are just a huge climate issue, and something I worked on a lot. Like the 2012 to 2016 drought in California was catastrophic for the native fish. The native salmon runs in the Sacramento River and actually all over the state. I wrote something about it. There was I forget which species. There was a species of trout. They literally took the last remaining population out of the river and kept them in tanks to so that they would survive because of the low flows. But there's a whole effort to try to get the the urban water agencies, and urban and small town municipal water agencies to not keep asking to take environmental flows when we go into a drought, but to implement better conservation practices so we don't just send all of our native aquatic life extinct in these longer, more severe droughts. So we'll see, but just some thoughts.
I've birded a couple of times. It's funny. I'm probably the only person who goes to Las Vegas for ecotourism. And in Red Rock Canyon area,
No,
I've
there's
birded
one
areas.
other, me.
I've birded. Unfortunately, it's no longer as friendly as it used to be, because it used to be a dude ranch, and I think it's now private. But you used to be able to go there, and you paid your $20 for parking, and you had this incredible, beautiful desert stream that passed through, and it was the home to like 70% of this one pupfish species. It's like literally, almost 3/4 of the entire planet's population of this one tiny species of fish was in this one small pond that I think would fit in my property, and I've got a small property. So, yeah, these in the West, especially in the Death Valley area, are literally holding on by a thread. And if it wasn't for our extreme efforts to keep these species alive, they wouldn't have made it. And especially if we would have continued to exploit what few water resources are there. Puffy.
Sorry, I meant to, Deirdre, I just read, I'm going to maybe try to find it, to post it, an article that was so beautifully written about the Delta, and two, about just all of the people who live along, I forget the name, but there were like two, in terms of shifting the water away from there. And, and this was sort of written in response to, remember Trump saying, the fires, you ought to be able to just turn on the spigot up north. And, and of course, it wouldn't have mattered. But anyway, it's just an article about the proposed, what Governor Newsom is proposing. And I thought immediately, oh, this is Deirdre's wheelhouse, but they're wanting to open up a third something that'll basically ruin what's left of, and I remember that around here, like the Willamette River in Oregon. The rivers, if left on their own, they have this meandering course. And over the millennia, and of course, indigenous inhabitants of our continent know this, and hello to those of you present, but we didn't with all this industrialization too, and putting water in places where it isn't, right, which you got to do to farm if you're in farm that area, et cetera. But anyway, they're planning to open a third, whatever you're calling it, thing to run the water south, and so this article just talks about that. And anyway, I'll post it because partly it was just so beautiful talking about the people that use the Delta, the fishing, the life.
The Delta smelt.
I was wanting, Pepe, I was just wanting to interject for a minute. What you're talking about is the Delta Tunnel and the North Delta intakes. And so historically, what they've done is the California State Water Project and the federal Central Valley Project have pumps in the South Delta. And so the water flows naturally through the Delta and then gets pulled, it gets pumped uphill into the California aqueduct, and where it flows 300 miles south across the desert. But they've had a long-term problem. So the California State Water Project was originally planning to augment the flows of the Sacramento River by 900,000 acre feet a year from a dam on the Eel River that was never built because of the Round Valley Indian Reservation. They got Governor Reagan then to agree to not build the dam there. So they had built the pumps as if they had that augmentation, and a lot of times when flows are not very high, it reverses the San Joaquin River at its mouth, and it's sort of an unauthorized point of diversion, and that entrains all of the fish, and even like Delta smelt, mamas, pregnant Delta smelt, like it entrains in all of the fish larvae, and it just gets sucked into the pumps. So there was an extinction spiral. So they were like, oh, we'll build a new intakes in the North Delta, and that'll save the Delta smelt. Well, the Delta smelt have gone functionally extinct in the Delta, and there was a remnant population that's being maintained in UC Davis labs, and they just revoked the funding. They're still gonna keep it, so it's really sad. But yeah, I've worked a lot with, there's a bunch of Delta legacy communities. They have development restrictions in the Delta because they're polders, they're reclaimed areas of freshwater marsh that have and so a lot of them, the peat is oxidized and they're below sea level. So they have development restrictions there, and it's still very similar to the way the landscape was in the 19th century.
Yeah, I guess I was talking about sorry, I'm going to drop down. The proposed Delta conveyance project that's being pushed was what I was.
Yeah, that's it. It's a giant tunnel. There was originally going to be 2 tunnels. It's now 1 tunnel. But yeah, it was originally going to have a capacity of 15,000 CFS, which is the entire average flow of the Sacramento River.
That's not much.
Well, they're planning to divert a
So
million, basically, whatever's of water. I'm just saying,
Acre feet
you
a
know,
year, yeah.
and so what happens when that's gone? But
I think that might be a really good topic for one of these spaces to find out more about that and discuss it. Thank you for bringing that up.
I would just want to break in quickly. I just got a message from a friend of the space, Mark Jones. Unfortunately, we have to move some radioactive dinosaur bones. I think that's a
Oh,
good
wow.
excuse. He's got,
Definitely.
he's got a good excuse.
Well, hopefully he could
Sorry.
come on and hopefully he could come on sometime and tell us about them.
It'll be a glowing review.
Punny, punny, punny.
I see Harold's hand up. Harold?
Hey, good afternoon. Well, afternoon where I am. I don't know where you
Me
guys
too.
are. Yeah, I just wanted to share
1936.
pretty much. Yeah. I just shared a podcast in the Purple Pill about frog saunas and how they can help, maintain local populations of amphibians. Um, I'm building one this spring. And basically, uh, their design uses glass and or plastic, and I'm not doing that. I'm going to be using a big pile of dark stones um, and covering it with a matrix of branches, and then covering that with a cap of soil, and then um, try to plant wildflower flowers on top of it. I am in a rainforest, so the flowers will probably make it. Um, so this is, one way we can support insects because the bugs live in there too. But these frog saunas help frogs fight off invasive fungus that they're not used to. And a lot of frogs suffer during the winter because of this fungus, and it's killing a lot of the population. So over the past these 15 years now, I've been building what I call salamander sanctuaries in forests, and basically it's nothing more than a big pile of logs in a shady place. Um, and this really provided an area for salamanders and other creepy crawlies uh, to uh, have a safe place from predators and to really grow the population. And this one piece of property that I worked on, had basically, a very just one little area, and I did a quick investigation. Only had a few salamanders, but after I fabricated this home for them, 5 years later, um, there was literally over 100 in this one little area, and there was 3 different species of salamanders, and in our area there was 50 different species of salamanders. So having this diversity in areas. I mean, these are little biodiversity islands that we can build. And I'm guilty of building these in Toronto High Park.
Really?
um, yeah,
That's awesome.
when when Stephen Harper labeled people that support the environment and the climate as eco-terrorists, I took to the streets and started planting things in defiance in Toronto. Uh, I spelt my name in wild garlic in a few places, probably overgrown by now. But yeah, I would.
That
So,
was the smell. No.
but yeah, we need to think local as well when we're, these workshops are great to share information and ideas. So I thought I'd share those with you. And again, these, the salamander sanctuaries began turning into fungus, different mushrooms, local mushrooms showed up, and just if you build it, they will come sort of idea. But it really, and I've built several here already, and here they have a yellow spotted salamander, and I never saw one before. They're very beautiful. And again, 3 years after, I have a little area that has about 10 to 15 in there now. So I'm going to be making more. But the frog sauna, I'm adding this summer to my garden. Uh, and basically, I have bullfrogs, leopard frogs, spring peepers, and then I think a couple different kinds of toads. So hopefully, I'll in a few years see a huge spike in those little critters because they do eat a lot of in the garden, anyways. I want them close to my garden, so they'll eat lots of bugs. But just thought I'd. It sounds funny, frog sauna, but that's what I'll be doing this spring. Anyways, thank you.
Thank you, Harold. That sounds amazing. Thanks for sharing that with us. I'd love to do something like that. Amphibians are one of the species that are threatened by climate change and also by land use change. And I think the International Union was saying that amphibians are expected to decrease by, or like 40% of amphibians are expected to go extinct. So it's really important to provide habitats and support them and everything like that. I'd love to find out more about that. I will definitely look at your podcast. Thank you for sharing that.
From a local angle, New York City has Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge, which is one of the, I mean, it's one of the greatest places in the Northeast to bird watch. And there's other things that you can do there. And we've been working for the last 40 years to bring herps back. Herps are invertebrate. It's the herpetology department. Essentially, it's snakes, it's lizards, it's all of the well, yeah, especially salamanders, which are used to be, you couldn't walk without stepping on a salamander in this area, accidentally, not intentionally. And they've also become exceedingly rare. It's an absolute shame that they're a critical, important part of the environment, and uh, well, not anymore. So we need to set aside as much space as possible. And quite frequently, the set aside is really nothing more than just a bunch of dead wood carefully prepared in a space that allows snakes, lizards, salamanders to uh, inhabit the nooks and crannies and just make a living.
That's a really good point, Sal. We just got to leave things where they are and let someone have a habitat.
I'm trying to do some bookkeeping here. Unfortunately, yeah, I just looked into the account of that gentleman who was joining us, and he's a Trumper, and he's extremely, what's the word I'm looking for? He was being disruptive, and the first time ever I've blocked someone from coming into the space. I hate to do it. It's taken a year before we finally did it, but I can't have disruptions. If you want to talk about the environment, if you want to talk about policy, please do so. More than happy to hear anybody's discussion. But if you're just going to push Trump currency, if that's all you're doing, no, you've come to the wrong spot. I'm sorry if that was a downer. But
Here. I like that.
I hate to do that. Robert, it's taken you a while today.
Yeah, thanks, Sam.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you, Sal, and I hope you're keeping well over there in New York, my friend. I also want to say a good afternoon to my dear friend Kim, who's over in Canada. I hope you're well, Kim, and I hope things are going okay for you. I send you all my ongoing support, love, and ability to continue to strive to fight for the environment in all its capacity. I do want
We
to.
haven't annexed her yet.
Sorry, Sal, what did you just say? Then I missed what you said.
We haven't annexed her yet.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I will be brief because Deirdre, I think, did have her hand up before I did. And I do like to maintain politeness, as you all know from me, wherever possible. So what I do want to touch on actually was something that was crossing my mind in the course of this space. I was actually thinking about the way that indigenous practices can actually help to halt biodiversity degradation and also species degradation and annihilation. I think actually I'm thinking I'm thinking along the levels of the way that our indigenous people conduct themselves over the land, and actually how we and bring those indigenous practices to actually try to save as much of the insect population, and indeed the all insect population globally, and species population globally. Because if we think for a minute how we actually conduct ourselves in the Western world, and the way that we are actively encouraging annihilation of species by the second, annihilation of butterflies, annihilation of bees, annihilation of ants, annihilation of mosquitoes, annihilation of crickets, etc., etc. In fact, a total blanket annihilation, ongoing annihilation of our insects at so many levels. It doesn't have to be that way. I know I keep saying that like a broken record, but we can actively move forward. We can move to a new mental level of being able to actively engage species protection, but it will very much involve us being able to have a new mindset. I call it being wired up in a new mental way of consciousness. We can halt the decline of our precious global insects, but we do have to encourage a new way of being able to do that. If we reconnect with ourselves, that's a start. If we reconnect with the land, that is a start. But we must actively reconnect with the actual essence of what we are lacking in understanding of our natural environments. I know I keep turning to indigenous practices, but it is something that I'm deeply ingrained with. In fact, although I'm a white man, I think I said it to last Sue on some capacity in a space. Although I'm white, I've got more in common with indigenous practices of conserving land than I have with my fellow white counterparts who so are dedicated to the total destruction and annihilation by the day of species and land and everything that goes about the ecological makeup of our planet. So I do think it's critical that we really do look towards indigenous people of all tribes on all in all countries across our planet, and we do have a good, long, hard think about what we can actively do to be able to halt species annihilation. Because you see, the problem is, I know I don't need to say to anyone here because we're all clued up about it, but I will say for anyone maybe listening away from the space that has an active interest in species protection, insect protection, and so forth, I will say this, that it is very much necessary for us to get a grip on what is wiping out our insects and wiping out our mammals and wiping out our wild animals. Because if we don't get a grip in it, and if we don't fundamentally change the ways that we actually live and how we connect with the environment at every level, if we don't change our mindsets with actually learning that to be able to live with the land, to actually have the land as part of your soul, to actually have the land as part of the ingrained embodiment of you, yourself, and not actually as some sort of sick and twisted money grabbing, dollar grabbing extension of being able to live on this planet. We will continue to go down that abyss, which I hate to have to say because I don't like using the word, because you all know me well enough to know the level of collapse that I keep having to see played out every day. It just grabs me by every fiber within me. And it's something that continues to cause me great anguish. So when I needed to mention those practices that are so prevalent and so necessary within our indigenous people, I will urge all white people at every single level across our planet. I know I don't need to do it here, but I urge you. I will say these words. Think about how indigenous people, how indigenous tribes live on our lands across the planet, from our indigenous tribes, brothers, sisters in the United States, to all indigenous people across all countries, from Australia and everywhere else across our world. Think about how they actively are engaging with safeguarding and protecting species, animals, insects at every single level. Think long and hard about how they are only taking what they need in order to live in their environments. That is the secret and the key of our indigenous people. It always has been. You only take what you actually need. And if you do take more, you put it back. You put it back responsibly, and you put it back consciously at every level. And if we don't encourage those practices, white people blanket covering our planet, we cannot say that we're going to be able to be enriched with the species at every single level that we deserve to continue to try to protect across our planet. Anyway, I will wind it up there for now, because I know there's hands with Harold and Deirdre, and I think Deirdre was next. So I'm going to hand the microphone, Sal, and Kim over to Deirdre, I think. But thank you.
I'm gonna use, I just want to thank you. I just wanted to get in for a few seconds about that.
Yeah, thanks, sir.
Historically, most of our society have not been going toward exponential wealth, where single individuals control as much as countries do. It has happened. I'm not going to say it hasn't happened. You know, with the J.P. Morgans and the Rockefellers, but the vast majority of people are not living, and of course this means, you know, whites are not living to become trillionaires. There is something wrong with people who have this infinite desire for wealth. Elon Musk. And the fact of the matter is, most people care. Most people do, you know, have in their hearts, souls, whatever you want to call it, the desire to live in harmony with their neighbors and with the environment. But there's always going to be people whose primary push in life is to dominate and to hurt. And we just have this extraordinary combination where, for the first time in America's history, we have a president who is not only evil but stupid, who has aligned himself with a billionaire who is also evil and stupid simultaneously. Worst of all worlds combinations. All right, that was a down note. Deirdre.
Just a sec.
By the way, very quick, I have to leave at 1, but I can keep the space running. Should we let Harold pass through then?
Yeah, sure.
Harold.
Well, thank you. No, I wanted to thank Robert for identifying this requirement. And I know that where I am in New Brunswick, our government has sided with the notion and the idea of Indigenous-led climate action. So they're funding groups that are going to determine what needs to be done with regards to climate, with regards to land use, with regards to water protection. And also our previous government didn't recognize our treaties, and the current government has made that recognition, and it's just the beginning. Um, but I also want to mention that Robert, I do believe you're from the UK. The British Crown is some estimates put it at damages of 36 trillion to nations um, that have been committed by previous um, activity. And I know in New Brunswick, there's issues that are signed directly with the Crown that are directly interfering with Indigenous sovereignty here. I don't know other places, but for a fact, um, the government has been in Nova Scotia violating those treaty agreements. So, you know, um, needs to be fought on all fronts. So, in order for Canada to achieve its journey of healing, it requires support from all parties that perpetrated these crimes of genocide and ongoing genocide, might I add. I'm not going to go into those issues, but the idea that indigenous-led efforts is the solution, and that's something that we're doing right now. So investments in green energy, investments in land management are the primary focus because there are corporations in New Brunswick that are polluting and not using the lands. They don't own the lands. They don't have title to the lands. So indigenous nations need to consent on all activities on their lands and waters. So that needs to be, the way forward. And we recognize that in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and we're way behind. We're really behind on reacting and enacting the most critical calls to action regarding children. Those are still missing. Canada has done nothing on that. So we need to remind our um, local, provincial, and federal representatives that they're failing at this. There are a few successes, but nowhere near what needs to be accomplished. So I just thought I'd add that. And I shared an article regarding in the Purple Pill regarding Canada's climate, Indigenous-led climate effort, and I hope this is expanded quickly. But other nations that inflicted damage here need to pay damages, and that would help fund um, Indigenous nations to accelerate their actions in order to achieve their um, uh, strategy on addressing climate, addressing clean water, addressing clean air, addressing land use, and returning uh, sovereign governance to those nations. Thank you.
Could I
Well,
say something now?
thank you, Harold, for that perspective. Yes, Deidre, hello.
Yeah, thanks so much, Harold. I wanted to say, so I've seen firsthand, I live in the Santa Cruz Mountains. I've lived here since I think it was 97, and I've seen firsthand the intensification of land use that's associated with population growth, and it's been kind of heartbreaking for somebody. It's not just so the northern part of Santa Cruz County kind of has become a bedroom commuting area to Silicon Valley, and there's just been a lot of housing. It's sort of the housing boom started in the 70s, so there's a lot of housing in the mountains. And we bought a home in an area of mostly 2 to 5 acre minimums. Ours was a lot split of about 2.5 acres, and we had an acre. And I was really trying to restore it. And we have there was the whole little development. There's a creek down by the road. So we had a wonderful chorus of frogs in the summer, and some neighbors moved in, and in spite of the county having a pretty strong riparian ordinance, they wanted a lawn, so they clear cut all the native vegetation down to the banks of the creek. And I worked with the local Sierra Club, and I went and I made a complaint to the county, and I just said, "Oh, it's a lawn," and I'm like, "Yeah, but there's supposed to be riparian vegetation, and there's even Endangered Species Act protection for red-legged frogs." And even when I later hooked up with our local chapter of the Sierra Club, and we went in and started emphasizing the importance of the county doing their riparian buffers, they wouldn't enforce it. And then they sort of looked at us as intruders. And Santa Cruz is actually has pretty strong ecological values. And I watched another neighbor, like on that one part of his property that was uphill from this riparian area, took a wood chipper and just cut down every tree and shrub on his property and chipped it. And he said he was making a horse area. And the problem was he did it on steep hills, and then the people who bought it actually it slid because we get intense rainstorms and the deep-rooted vegetation hold it. So they had to build $100,000 retaining wall. And it was just like, can't you just leave the vegetation there? And I had to really push back with them. I had a thicket on our property in the middle of a hairpin turn, and they wanted me to clear cut the entire hairpin turn. And there was threatened species of wood rat. They built these really amazing like stick houses. They're like about 2-3 feet tall, and generations will live in there. So anyway, there was one of those in there. But I finally talked to County Environmental Health, and they're like, yes, you can keep it, but they're using fire danger to just push people to just clear cut all the vegetation. And we had another neighbor who did that too. So it's
Deidre,
just really hard.
I was wondering about that in California, that it would hurt biodiversity because they have such strict standards, and from what I understand, regulations that people have to follow about having vegetation around their house.
Yeah, well, yeah, so the requirement is to clear within 100 feet, and I was of houses, but this was like beyond the 100-foot mark, and like the forest. And what you want to do is remove fire ladders. So you want to make sure that there's plenty of clearance between the brush and between any shrubs. Like I had a native hazelnut and a tree canopy, but other than that, you can leave little islands of shrubs, and they're incredibly important for foraging. But I have fought this huge battle with my road association. We had people coming on our property and trespassing, and somebody dumped a whole bunch of fill down the hill, killed a bunch of the oak trees. It was really hard, and I just realized like I was the only person who had a heart connection with the land. And I don't know, I developed it going up to when I was a kid growing up in Colorado. My mom would go up and we'd stay, and her friend had a cabin, and her family had a cabin in the mountains in Colorado, and we'd go stay there. But it's a sickness in our people, and I, like I had, I think it is like indigenous people have. I just had, um, this deep heart connection with the forest, and it made me feel, like really heartsick in this kind of deep way to have that happen. But the other people in the road association just didn't have it, or even my own husband, who, you know, I do love, but it was funny to realize that he just didn't have that kind of connection. And I don't know how we foster it, but I don't think, well, they're not going to do land back for, a bunch of homes. Nobody's going to, like, those homes are there unless we have, like, a big population crash, or mass migration out of an area. These wildland urban interface areas aren't going to be returned to indigenous stewardship. So I don't know what the answer is.
Well, I don't think the states has signed on to it, but the Kunming, what's the other name? The Montreal Protocol on Biodiversity, which calls on countries to restore or set aside 30% of their land to nature, 30% of the seas to nature. I think
Actually,
there's that.
California is implementing that. And I have worked some with people that they're trying to get pieces of land for wildlife corridors between the Sierras and the valleys, and so there's migratory corridors. So yeah, there is that, and there's Santa Cruz County where I live. We bought a new house that's next to a state park, so that's wonderful. Um, um, so there's some huge state parks that were bought real early on, like beginning of the 20th century in the northern Santa Cruz County. So, so that's helpful. And it does provide areas.
That must be very nice.
I'm just going to slip in and say that the single largest state park in the United States is New York's Adirondack State Park.
New York
So when you think about
has beautiful parks.
When you think about, I think New York is the 30th largest state in terms of size, but it has the largest state park. And that's one of many. If you include all of the Finger Lake parks, if you include the Catskills Game Preserve, if you include the parks on Long Island, I wouldn't be surprised if New York isn't 50%
Is
parkland.
that because of historical, making it just happened to be in the right place at the right time in terms of like late 18th century, and there was a big push to preserve nature because people do love nature, especially
locally, yes.
Yes.
Locally, yes. But the rest of the state, it's hard to make a living in the Adirondacks unless you're a skier. There are people who farm the Adirondacks, but it gets horribly cold, as does sections of Vermont, New England, and Maine. So part of the reason is because it's best served as state park. You really can't have massive infrastructure in these parts of Upper New England. And yes, New York State is part of New England.
Yeah, I love New York State parks. I was amazed at how beautifully they're laid out, the paths along them, how much nature is preserved, and just the natural landscape and surroundings that's there. They're incredible. Just to touch back on what Robert and Deidre were saying about, and also Harold, about indigenous values and indigenous ways. I mean, I don't quite comprehend how any human being that spends time in nature doesn't love it, doesn't, just adore it and think this is the best thing ever. Because, if you have spent any time in like an inner city and then go out to nature, I mean, there's just,
Well,
so much beauty within nature. I don't understand how people can't think we've got to preserve this and restore it as much as we can.
once again, I'm coming back to New York State. New York State was the home of the Rockefellers. The Rockefellers probably have donated more federal and state land than anyone else for park creation. And New York was also the home, of course, of President Theodore Roosevelt, who was the father of the national park system, who worked harder than any president in history to establish the concept of parkland for the use of everyone, to be put in perpetuity for future generations to serve everyone. And I almost hate to wonder if maybe it's because New York was one of the wealthiest parts of the country that people felt an obligation, the rich here felt an obligation to give back. And they did so by buying land, by having these gigantic ancestral homes, and just simply giving almost all of it away to charity to help other people.
I did want to say, so, California is where John Muir started,
Muir.
his effort to preserve the Sierra. And I've been up to,
There's a forest named after him, isn't there? The Muir
yeah,
Forest?
Yes.
Or,
yeah.
okay.
So
And
he started the Sierra Club, and the Sierra Club headquarters, national headquarters, are in San Francisco, and I've been up there. And that's why there's a network of Sierra Club chapters. I think there's like 13 chapters in California. And there's a state conservation committee, and they really are land guardians, and they try to oppose development in sensitive areas and preserve local land. They say, the victories are temporary and the defeats permanent,
Oh,
but
Deidre,
they do a lot.
sorry to cut you off, but this is related to it. The Western monarch is not protected in California, and that's where it overwinters. And I think, it's down to like 1% of its former nesting grounds. So we really need people in California to advocate for the Western monarch and to have areas that, they can be protected on. Right now, they're roosting in like eucalyptus trees along golf courses, and their existence is very fragile because we're not protecting a particular area, saying that this has to be undisturbed for them.
Actually, in Santa Cruz, there is a protected area with eucalyptus groves where they do stay, and there's a monarch festival there every year. I'll go look it up. It's I'm blanking on the name, but it's it's a park by the beach. So
Oh, thank you. Okay, I didn't know about that. Maybe it was federally regulated area or something, but thank you.
Yeah.
Let me add a little bit of color to this.
Monterey too. They've got Monarch Festival, and they have protected. Monterey Bay is very protected. It's been cherished for like 150 years.
In the winter of 23-24, the measured count on Western monarchs was just under 2,000 butterflies. That is now increased to about 200,000. So obviously they had a spectacular recovery, although you have to ask, even though it's just an insect, is 2,000 enough of a breeding stock to ensure that there is enough biodiversity for the species, the subspecies, to survive? But that goes to show how horrifically depressed the population was 2 years ago. I haven't heard this year's numbers.
Right. Well, the good thing is probably in terms of the stock for reproduction is that it seems like there is some interchange between the Western monarch and the Eastern monarch.
Okay, excellent.
So, and also for the Eastern monarch, this overwinter was double the size in terms of hectares than last winter was in Mexico.
I don't know if we do well. To be honest, it was, like I said, it was so bad that they were I think it was 1,976 was the total. I don't remember exactly, but 1,976 is an astonishingly horrific low population for vertebrates. For insects, that's as close to zero as you can get and not be zero. Because obviously insects are at much greater risk of extinction.
It's pretty
Their
dire.
ranges are, yes.
I guess we should mention it. Let's see, because there is a new study out that there was a 22% decline between 2000 and 2020 in the States. They looked at, and this is for butterfly populations. In the past 2 decades, volunteers, along with researchers, spotted and counted 12.6 million individual butterflies from 554 species as a part of 76,000 surveys at approximately 2,500 different locations across the US. And yeah, I mean, this was just recently published in the Journal of Science. There were
I'm
more
just
than.
I'm going to very quickly break in. And by the way, I have to leave in 5 minutes, but I can keep the space alive. I've been clicking F5 for the last like 9 days, and Biomass finally came out. This is the latest. I've never seen it come out on the 13th. Biomass is the amount of ice in the Arctic by volume. So biomass isn't measuring ice extent. It isn't measuring ice area. It is measuring, it is an attempt to, I should say, measure the total amount of ice found in the entire Arctic by volume. And we had a prior record low of 2017 was 17,366. We are now at 18,141 cubic kilometers. So we are still we are still higher than the record low, but this is the closest to the record we have seen since the extraordinary year of 2016, 2017. And those records were not just due to temperature, those were due to storms. Ice, obviously, ice melts when it's warm, but ice also melts when you have storms mixing up the ice and agitating it and causing, because when you introduce cold water to ice, you're going to end up with more cold water and less ice. So I'll do the chart on that later. Like I've said, literally clicking F5 for the last 6 or 7 days, and it's finally dropped. And you know, this might be a good time for me to make my exit. I will keep the space open. I will have it running while I drive. But my wife is working a really weird shift lately, so she's right now doing no lunches. So she's leaving an hour early. I'll have to get into this another time, but to put it subtly, uh, I made a joke about this. I'm very, very happy that the colleague she works with, who's now on temporary leave, his nickname now isn't Lefty. Uh, if you understand what I'm saying, he was involved in an accident, and he's lucky to have his right hand. So because of that, she's under weird schedules now, and because of that, I have to leave. So thank you all for coming. Look, I will keep the space open. I just won't be able to
Sal,
talk because I'll be driving.
do you want to just we could wrap it up if you like. I mean, you know, because you'll be driving, and I don't want you to be distracted. That's fine.
All right,
with me,
if you want, because we have so much to talk about next week.
We do. We'll
Next week
continue on.
Next week we'll be talking about spring, and there's so much astrophysics that I wanted to discuss this week that I didn't get to. So I know that's more fun for me than for everybody else. But, you know, I gotta have my fun too. So thank you all for coming. I'm sorry that we shut this down so abruptly, but you know, life goes on. Thank you all. Thank you, Kim, very much for showing up. Thanks for all your help and support. And we'll talk to you. I wanted to say so desperately, we'll see you next week, but we're not going to see you next week. We're just going to see your avatars next week. So we'll talk to you next week, and you'll talk to us. Bye bye, all.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.